Hi, my name's Lee Bivona, and this is one of my video vignettes for the video series called A Life Worth Living. And this vignette is called Hallway Mantra. And when I was first in my nursing career over 20 years ago, I worked in a head trauma ICU, which it's based on its reputation was actually one of the top four head and spinal cord injury ICUs in the world. Which meant a lot of success rates, but also a lot of huge drama as far as the physical damages that a person's body was brought to our ICU for, and also the range of amazing things that we would do, both in the experimental range and also the range of things that we could do to try to keep somebody staying here on Earth in their physical body for this one lifetime. So it was a place of magic, but also a place there was a lot of devastation, a lot of death, and these were the realities of both working in that setting and also being family members and patients coming through that setting also. I found it really important for myself to find a way to connect to the patients and their family in a way that would help me feel what they were feeling. And so I developed this type of mantra, and I called it hallway mantra for the reasons it'll be obvious in a moment. The hospital was huge, was over 1,000 bed hospital, and our ICU alone was over 30 beds for the head and spinal cord injury ICU. We were up on the third floor of this huge building, and so there was an elevator after passing through the gift shop area and kind of the main common lounges and kind of customer and guest areas, was coming up to this third floor. And how this worked out psychologically was actually stunning to me, but it was what I had to deal with. And the families, the patients had to deal with also. On this third floor, we would get off of the elevator and make an immediate right. And what that faced us with, again, this is for family members as well as us staff members, was facing directly into the family's waiting room for head trauma ICU, for the multi-trauma ICU, and for head and cardiac and respiratory ICU. So you can only imagine the complexity of the type of patients that were in these settings, and also the amount of death and devastation that these families were facing. And every single time that that elevator opened, no matter who it was, all of us who were on that elevator were kind of turned by default to look directly at these people in their moment of often greatest grief when they were told that someone had died, that a procedure didn't work, or that a devastation was worse than family members had hoped. So, in kind of this raw, naked way, these family members were just totally exposed both to each other and to us as all the staff members, changing about every 4 hours to some group of different staff members. So it looked very raw and vulnerable to me, and I wanted to find some way within myself that I could help my own consciousness get in tune with where they were, so that I could help them cope better by the situation if I could put myself there. So what I did one day was, as I turned that corner and looked into that ICU, I turned again another sharp 90 degrees, and it was a very long hallway. And what I did is I actually counted the number of steps that it took for me to get between that ICU waiting room and these huge steel double doors, where I would then turn right and then go into the ICU. And it was 36 steps, which worked out very conveniently for me. And what I did with those 36 steps was, I was actually 36 years old. So trying to find kind of magical ways to make things work out, I saw this as a perfect opportunity for actually creating kind of a spiritual exercise, or kind of a walking mantra. And what I would do at 36 years old, I would actually take every step and in my head go back 1 year. So I would think of to myself 36, 35, 34, 33, 32, 31, And I kept doing that, but what I was doing was I was recalling experiences in my life, an actual state of consciousness that I was maintaining or sustaining at those ages. And what that ended up doing was putting me back to, by the time I hit the doorway with this very simple mantra, I was actually mentally stepping back to the point of what I emotionally and mentally felt like when I was 18. And for all of you that can step back in that place for even a moment, and then contrast that with your experiences now at 40, 50, 60, 70, or 80 years old, how truly naive we were at 18 years old, of how innocent we were about the complexities of life, about the trauma that life brings us, both in death, in injury, in loss of function, in loss of cognitive ability, and all of these things that just saturate us as we become older in our lives and become more and more accountable for actually learning not just how to live with our skills. We also have these ideals that we should have all these skills, but the private embarrassment is that we often don't have these aptitudes. Some of us may end up blind or amputated at some point or part of our body, or a loss of cognitive skill. So what I'm saying is, as I was walking down that hallway, I ended up being at this state of mind of almost a pure 18-year-old ignorance. But now, at an older age, I could contrast that to the knowing and to the weight of being able to contrast that with being in my 30s or 40s, and the painful contrast of being 18 and naive, and now being 36 and not naive. And then what I would do, this doorway was these huge steel doors, and it had a steel band between them. And this is a very old building, probably built in the 1960s, maybe even 50s. And this steel band in the door was somewhat bent. And these doors were not going to change unless hit by a nuclear holocaust or something. But as the door opened, as I would push the handles of the door, it always made this clanging sound of this metal snap as these doors open and this metal hit on one or the other doors. So that was a constant reminder, and I used that as kind of my own wake-up call to then, from looking down and imagining that I've gone all the way down to being 18 years old, to then use that snap to actually look up and imagine this environment that I'm seeing if I was 18 years old. And believe me, the shock of seeing these things, of people in bizarre contrapted beds, ventilator and IV and brain monitoring tubes, and all these incredible positions and locations in a person's body, often more equipment than there is around the patient than there is room for his physical space, multiple staff members, the look of impending death for the staff members as they look at this person, of the sense that this person is nearly on the brink of death, perhaps for the 7th or 8th time that day. So for me to walk into that setting and see that shock was riveting at best. The second thing that I would do is, once I was in the nurses area and began to walk to the center of the ICU, I would do this little imagining, and I would imagine that I was walking and talking to myself like this, with this finger pointing at me, and this very stern voice saying, remember this feeling every time you walk into this ICU. When you can remember the horror and the shock that you're feeling, you will have some approximation of what your family members and patients feel like every day that they are here in this intensive care setting. And by being in tune with them this way, then you're in a better position to give love and to give patient care. And I actually worked in that ICU long enough that I had really learned how to use that skill, not just in that ICU setting, but to actually teach in other care settings. I worked in cancer care for 5 years. I worked in hospice for 5 years after that. And I learned actually how to teach that model to hundreds and hundreds of nurses and respiratory therapists, medical students and physicians, on how to use this very simple tool to kind of reframe their reality so that they could give better and more compassionate care to the patients that they were caring for from that day forward. Thank you.